I'm Greg Sando. I am sitting here with Paul Boulian, who has something, I don't know, Paul, something a little bit dramatic, a strong statement about where you think orchestras are and what you think they should do. But maybe to start with, Paul, I know you as a consultant, and you could say a little bit about who you are and what you do, so people understand why you have the standing to say what you're going to say. I know you, I'll just start it off like this, as a consultant who's done productive work with the Pittsburgh Symphony, the St. Louis Symphony, and the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra, although I'm sure that's only the beginning, and you work outside the orchestra world as well.
I do. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
You obviously set some high expectations right from the beginning.
Look, I know you, Paul, so I think the expectations are justified.
Well, I'd like to start just by thanking you and polyphonic.org for this. I was on the board of SOI for quite a number of years. Symphony Orchestra Institute.
Predecessor in many ways to polyphonic.
Predecessor to this. So for me, this
Harmony
is
magazine.
That's right.
Yeah.
So for me, this is a continuation of that work.
Yeah.
So I really feel good about that. I guess what I'd say is I'm probably a pretty unlikely person to be sitting next to you. And the reason
we were scraping the bottom of the barrel.
Yeah, we're really scraping the bottom of the barrel. I'm an industrial consultant.
Right.
I have been doing that for over 30 years.
Yeah.
I got involved in this industry, in this field, through one of my clients who was on the board of an orchestra. Mm-hmm. And that was now 15 years ago.
And which orchestra?
That was the Hartford Symphony. Okay. They had just come off 2 very lengthy work stoppages. And I worked with them for almost 4 years, helped negotiate 2 contracts, worked with them on a strategic plan, and that led to work with the Symphony Orchestra Institute, and I was invited by Paul Judy, who founded the SOI, to join the board. I worked very closely with Fred Zanone, who was a past chairman of ICSOM for almost 5 years, consulting to various symphonies, including Philadelphia, Baltimore, Toronto, and a number of others, including the ones you mentioned. And so I have been spending about 25 to 30% of my time since 1992, 93, working in this field.
Well, before we get to the allegedly dramatic statement, how did the orchestra field strike you when you came to it from the outside?
Well, I might say a few things. One, I'm not a musician.
Right.
And it became first a curiosity because of the complexity that I found when I first began doing this work. It's a multi-party system with boards, staffs, musicians, music directors, a public, and I found that to be very challenging from an organizational standpoint. How do you deal with an organization that has so many varied interests? How do you help them learn what their shared interests are and how they begin to work together towards those shared interests?
It's interesting that you included the public in that. The public, the audience, and then more widely the people in the orchestra's community, whether or not they go to concerts. These are not often included among the orchestra's core constituencies.
Right, and I think one of the things that I bring to this because of my industrial background is the customer always comes first.
Just what I was thinking.
And the customer is always right.
Right. Any commercial firm in the business of selling products knows that. You have to put the customer first, or else you don't sell anything.
So my way of coming at this has always been from the outside in versus the inside out. Mm-hmm. My first question always is, what does the customer want? What's the customer telling you? What's the customer saying to you? And I found it both challenging and curious that I ended up having work in a field where it seemed as though the customer often was secondary to many of the people in the institution.
To my experience, orchestras put their mission first. Our mission is playing this great music.
Right.
And the fear is that if you start putting the customers front and center, the audience, people. These people won't want to hear the great music. They're going to want to hear some watered down version of it. And now you'll be dumbing down your product. You'll be failing your mission. And so somehow you have to put yourself in the impossible position of doing something that you think is important, whether anybody's going to come or not. And then if people don't come, you're really screwed, of course.
And unfortunately, I think that a number of orchestras are moving down that path. They haven't found a way to reconcile what the message the public is trying to send. And I'm not even clear what that message is, to tell you the truth, because I'm not sure that anybody really understands the message. I don't understand it. What I do know is what I see, but I don't yet know root cause. And that was one of the things that I thought we might talk about today is what are some of the root causes of what we see going on? Because when I work in my industrial world, most of the time we spend when we see markets declining and share being lost, we immediately try to understand what the root cause is of those events.
So when you talk about the orchestra world and you talk about what's going on, you mean markets declining and share being lost?
And I think it would be useful to understand the perspective that I come from. I've only worked with one ROPA orchestra, regional orchestra. All of the rest of the orchestras that I've worked with are the larger orchestras in this country. So when I speak about this, I'm really speaking about the orchestras that have budgets in the $5 to $30 million, $35 million range. So my perspective is always from orchestras that are in relatively large cities and have significant financial and audience challenges on a very large scale.
Right, which by this time are very well known about, or talked about in other interviews we've done here. It's really not a surprise that there's competition to sell tickets, that subscriptions are declining, that you can't take for granted that the audience is going to come to sort of worship at the orchestra's mission. Right. So, maybe that's the time to introduce what I've been talking about as your dramatic point.
Well, I don't know if I have a dramatic point. I have been spending a lot of time really trying to understand what is driving some of what we see.
Right.
And I have actually been spending more time ruling out things than ruling things in. For example, I'm not convinced that there is a significant audience problem.
In terms of that there are not people out there who want to come to the orchestra.
Right. I believe that I think there are data that show that there are many people interested in coming. So that, I partially began to reach that conclusion by doing some analysis of pricing and subscriptions over the last 20 to 25 years in a number of large orchestras. And lo and behold, I'm sure this is well known, if you start looking at the correlation between price increases and subscriptions, they're inversely related. The
higher the price is, the fewer people subscribe.
Absolutely. And in some orchestras, the correlation or the relationship is absolutely 1-to-1. For almost every dollar lost, you lose 1% of subscribers. So, I start looking at...
Wait, you mean for every dollar
the price increase, increase.
You lose 1% of subscribers.
So I began...
So there's an actual mathematical relationship
absolutely.
you can trace.
Absolutely.
Which helps to rule out something that some people will say, the prices have been increasing over a time when subscriptions are declining for other reasons.
No,
so it just happens to be parallel but not related.
We can't prove causation, but I'm beginning to believe there's causation. And the reason I am is that with several of the orchestras that I am working with right now, we have been testing certain kinds of pricing plans. And what we have seen, St. Paul is a good example. Now, they're not a symphony orchestra, but there's an ability
they're a chamber orchestra.
They're a chamber orchestra.
But they face the same problems as anybody else.
They have significantly changed their pricing. They have reduced the cost of subscriptions, and they're selling out many of their venues.